The morning they buried my access road, I didn't yell, didn't threaten anybody, didn't even climb out of my truck right away. I just sat there with one hand on the steering wheel staring at a brand new curb where my gravel lane used to be, and I remember thinking, well, that's going to cost somebody a whole lot more than they realize. By lunchtime, half the county already knew old Wade Holloway finally lost his temper with the new subdivision crowd. Except the funny thing is, I never actually lost my temper at all. That's what made people nervous. I've lived out in Mercer County my whole life. Same patch of land my grandfather bought after coming home from Korea. Same farmhouse with the porch that leans a little left because nobody's bothered fixing it in 30 years. Folks around here know me as Wade, 48 years old, raises cattle, goats, and enough stubbornness to qualify as a second crop. I'm not complicated. I wake up before sunrise, drink bad coffee, fix fences that don't stay fixed, and spend most days trying to keep animals alive while weather and bills compete to kill them. Now about 3 years ago, developers started creeping out toward our side of the county. Happens everywhere eventually. First comes a coffee shop nobody asked for, then luxury homes with fake barn doors and names like The Preserve at Ashton Creek, even though there ain't been a creek there since the 70s. The development next to my land ended up being called Cedar Run Estates, which was funny considering they bulldozed every cedar tree within a mile radius. That whole project was run by a woman named Vanessa Sterling. Early 40s maybe, always looked expensive in a way that felt intentional. White SUV, white teeth, white pants that somehow never got dirty. She talked like every conversation was happening in a board meeting. Real polished, real controlled. First time we met, she walked my property line in little tan boots worth more than my first truck and said, "You have beautiful land, Mr. Holloway. It deserves to be integrated into something modern." I remember laughing because I honestly thought she was joking. She wasn't. See, people like Vanessa look at farmland the way gamblers look at poker chips. They don't see history or work or family buried in the dirt. They see unused potential, empty space, a thing waiting to become profitable. At first we stayed out of each other's way. Her crews built roads. My cows kept chewing grass. Everybody minded their business. Then one afternoon I came back from hauling feed and found survey flags running straight across my access lane. The same gravel road my family had used for over 60 years to reach the south pasture. I called the county office thinking it had to be a mistake. It wasn't. Turns out Cedar Run's new cul-de-sac expansion slightly overlapped my registered farm easement. That's how they phrased it too. Slightly overlapped. Like somebody accidentally bumped a shopping cart. What they really meant was they intended to pave directly over the only route connecting my equipment barn to 200 acres of grazing field. I drove straight to the HOA meeting that night, still covered in dust, boots muddy enough to make half those people nervous just looking at me. They had one of those little catered setups too, bottled water lined up all neat, tiny sandwiches nobody actually eats. Vanessa stood near a projector smiling at residents like she was running for office. When she saw me walking in, her smile tightened just a little. "Mr. Holloway," she said, smooth as ever. "We were planning to contact you." I said, "Funny way of contacting me, burying my road under concrete." The room went quiet fast after that. One older guy tried pretending to read paperwork. Some young couple near the back suddenly got real interested in their phones. Vanessa, though, she stayed calm. Too calm. "We've provided an alternate public access route," she said. "Our engineers determined it was a reasonable accommodation." I actually laughed again, mostly because I couldn't believe the arrogance sitting in front of me. "That route adds 6 miles, I told her. "Half of it washes out every spring, and my trailers can't clear the ditch crossing. It's still legally accessible." That sentence right there. That was the moment I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. She knew exactly what she was doing. She thought because I was some aging cattle farmer with dirt under his nails, I'd either roll over or waste years getting crushed in court while her subdivision kept growing. Then she made the mistake that started all of it. She smiled. Not polite smiling either. It was that tight little corporate smile people use when they think they've already won. And she said, "Progress requires compromise, Mr. Holloway." I stared at her for a few seconds, nodded once, and said, "You ever worked cattle before, Vanessa?" That caught her off guard. "No." "Well," I said, "then you probably shouldn't build a neighborhood on top of their trail." Vanessa looked at me like I'd spoken another language, and honestly, that should have been my warning sign right there. Because people who've never lived around working land tend to believe paperwork can overpower reality. They think if something doesn't fit neatly inside a neighborhood brochure, it can just be redesigned out of existence. I left that HOA meeting without another word. Couple residents watched me walk out like I was some kind of threat, but truth was, I wasn't angry yet. Tired maybe. Disappointed for sure. But mostly I was curious how far these people were willing to push before somebody finally told them no. The next few weeks got ugly in quiet ways. Construction crews finished paving over my gravel lane. Decorative streetlights went up where my feed truck used to drive. They planted little maple trees along the sidewalk like they were decorating a movie set. Every morning I'd stand by the fence with coffee in hand watching people jog through what used to be cattle ground. And every morning I'd feel that strange pressure in my chest. Not rage exactly, more like grief. Because land remembers things. My grandfather used to say that. You can scrape it flat, pour concrete over it, rename it Cedar Run Estates. But underneath all that, the land still remembers what it was built for. One afternoon, my neighbor Earl came by to help repair a fence line. Earl's 72, smells permanently like diesel fuel and Copenhagen tobacco, and has the kind of face that looks carved out of old leather. He leaned against the gate watching a golf cart cruise through the subdivision and said, "You gonna sue him?" "Maybe," I said. He spit into the dirt. "That'll take years." "Probably." Then he got quiet for a second before saying, "They know about the livestock corridor?" I looked at him, and Earl looked right back at me. Now here's the thing nobody in that subdivision understood. My old access road wasn't just a driveway. Decades back, the county had officially registered that same route as an agricultural movement corridor connecting my north holding pasture to the southern grazing fields near Miller Creek. Back then, farms around here moved livestock across connected parcels all the time, and once those routes got recorded, they stayed recorded. You couldn't just erase them because property values went up. That night, I dug through old filing cabinets in my barn office until almost midnight. Dust everywhere. Old permits. Vet receipts. My dad's handwritten cattle logs from the 90s. Then finally, buried inside a cracked county folder, I found it. Original survey maps, easement records, livestock transit documentation, every signature stamped clean and legal. I sat there a long time staring at those papers. Not because I was planning revenge. Honestly, at first I just felt sad. Because deep down I knew exactly what was coming. A few days later, I requested a formal county review. Vanessa responded through lawyers almost immediately. That alone told me she was nervous. Their argument boiled down to this. The livestock route had become functionally obsolete due to modern development planning. Functionally obsolete. That phrase kept bouncing around my head for days. Like cattle somehow stop existing because somebody installed a fountain and 2 rows of hydrangeas. Meanwhile, things on my farm started getting harder fast. Feed deliveries took twice as long using the alternate road. One rainstorm turned the back route into soup and nearly tipped my trailer into a drainage ditch. I lost 3 goats after a delayed water run during a heat wave. That one bothered me more than I like admitting. People think farmers get used to losing animals. You don't. You just get quieter about it. Then came the county hearing. Now, if you've never been to a rural zoning hearing before, imagine the world's most uncomfortable church potluck mixed with a courtroom. Folding chairs. Weak coffee. Everybody pretending not to gossip while absolutely gossiping. Vanessa arrived with attorneys. I arrived with Earl. That alone should tell you everything. Inside the hearing room, Vanessa gave this polished presentation about community growth and evolving infrastructure needs. Big fancy boards. Architectural renderings. Smiling families on poster paper. According to her, Cedar Run Estates represented the future of Mercer County. Then the county clerk asked me if I had anything to add. I remember standing up slow, hat in my hands, feeling every eye in that room land on me. "I don't know much about community branding," I said. "But I know if you block the route between holding fields and water access, animals still gotta move somehow." One of Vanessa's lawyers interrupted. "The route is no longer practical." I looked straight at him and said, "Son, cattle don't care what's practical." Few people laughed at that. Vanessa didn't. The county postponed final judgment pending inspection, which meant legally, nothing had actually been resolved yet. And that mattered more than anybody realized. Because while lawyers argued paperwork, life on a farm kept moving. 3 mornings later, right before sunrise, I walked out to the north gate carrying a thermos of coffee and a set of bolt cutters. Fog hung low across the pasture, real thick and silver-looking under the early light. Animals were already awake, shifting around, making those low, restless sounds livestock make when they know feeding time's close. My ranch hand Miguel met me by the fence. Miguel had worked with me almost 12 years. Quiet guy, smart as hell, rarely surprised by anything. He looked at the chain in my hand and said, "You sure about this?" I took a sip of coffee. "Nope." That made him laugh. Then he looked toward the subdivision and muttered, "This gonna make some people real unhappy." "Well," I said, handing him the paperwork folder, "good thing unhappy ain't illegal. Now let me be clear about something. I never planned destruction. I never wanted chaos. The route existed legally, inspections were pending, and my livestock still needed movement access between grazing sections. Everything that happened next happened because reality collided headfirst with people pretending farms work like decorative scenery. I cut the chain. For about 5 seconds, nothing happened. Then one goat squeezed through the opening. And that was the beginning of the end. Goats are basically tiny criminals with hooves. Once one goes somewhere, the rest assume there's trouble worth joining. Within seconds, the whole front cluster pushed through the gate and started trotting down the old corridor like they'd done it their entire lives. Because technically, they had. Miguel watched them disappear toward Cedar Run and just whispered, "Jesus Christ." Then came the sheep. Slow at first, then all together, pouring through the opening like living water. Hundreds of pounds of wool and stubborn momentum moving exactly where instinct told them to move. And behind them, the cattle. That sound still sticks with me sometimes. Heavy hooves against fresh asphalt. Slow breathing. Metal ear tags clinking in the morning air while 6,000 pounds of beef cattle wandered calmly into one of the richest neighborhoods in the county. At first, the subdivision stayed quiet. Then somebody screamed. A porch light flipped on. Then another. One woman stepped outside holding a coffee mug and froze dead still while 3 goats started eating flowers out of her landscaping beds. Somewhere farther down the block, a car alarm started going off. Miguel climbed onto the fence beside me, shaking his head. "You know," he said, "I think this may escalate." And right about then, one of my younger steers rubbed against a decorative vinyl fence hard enough to fold the whole thing sideways like cardboard. That's when the real panic started. Within 10 minutes, Cedar Run Estates looked less like a luxury subdivision and more like the opening scene of a modern-day Western gone terribly wrong. Goats were standing on porch furniture like they paid property taxes. Sheep had completely blocked the main roundabout near the fountain, and my cattle just kept moving steady and calm down the center of the street, while terrified residents pressed themselves against parked SUVs, filming everything on their phones. The wildest part was how normal the animals acted. To them, this wasn't chaos. This was Tuesday. I climbed into my old truck and rolled slowly toward the subdivision entrance while Miguel rode beside me, trying so hard not to laugh, he was turning red in the face. "You seeing this?" he kept saying. "Oh, I'm seeing it." By the time we reached the first row of homes, people were yelling from every direction at once. "Whose animals are these? You need to control them. Oh my God, they're destroying the landscaping." One guy in tennis clothes pointed at me like he'd just found America's most wanted criminal. "You can't do this." I looked at him and said, "Actually, legally speaking, apparently I can." That didn't calm him down much. Then Vanessa showed up. And buddy, I almost felt bad for her. Almost. She came storming out of the HOA office wearing cream-colored heels completely unsuited for grass, screaming into a phone while trying to wave people backward from a Brahmin cow standing beside somebody's mailbox, chewing decorative shrubs like salad. "Move them," she yelled the second she saw me. "Move them right now." I leaned against my truck door. "Where exactly would you like them to go, Vanessa? You built houses on their route. You're creating a public safety issue." "No," I said calmly. "Your development created a public safety issue. My cattle are just using registered access." That hit harder than she expected because for the first time since all this started, she realized I wasn't bluffing. Then one of the goats jumped onto the hood of a white Mercedes. Miguel physically had to turn away so nobody saw him laughing. Now here's where things really shifted. Up until that moment, most residents thought this was just some angry farmer causing trouble. But once county officials arrived and started reviewing documents, the mood changed fast. Because paperwork doesn't care who has the nicer neighborhood. Two sheriff deputies showed up first, followed by county zoning inspectors. One older inspector named Randall took a slow look around the subdivision, watched a line of sheep wandering past a decorative fountain, then opened my file folder and sighed like a man developing a migraine in real time. "You weren't kidding," he muttered. "No, sir." Vanessa walked over immediately, trying to regain control of the situation. "This is intentional harassment," she snapped. "He released livestock into a residential community." Randall adjusted his glasses and said, "Ma'am, according to these records, your development obstructed a protected agricultural transit corridor." "But this is absurd." Randall looked around at 3 goats eating rose bushes beside the clubhouse entrance. "Well," he said dryly, "I'd say the absurd part already happened. I swear Miguel almost fell off the truck after that." Things unraveled quick after officials finished reviewing everything. Turns out Cedar Run had skipped multiple review requirements during expansion approval. They assumed nobody would challenge them hard enough to matter. But once inspectors started digging, violations stacked up like firewood. Improper obstruction of agricultural access, unsafe rerouting of heavy farm equipment, failure to preserve protected easements, potential liability exposure involving livestock movement. Every new violation made Vanessa look a little less polished. At one point, she pulled me aside near the sidewalk while crews tried guiding sheep away from the community garden. Her voice had changed by then. Softer, shakier. "Wade, we can fix this." That was the first time she'd used my first name. I remember studying her face for a second, realizing she genuinely didn't understand why any of this mattered until the consequences crawled directly across her precious pavement. "You ever lose land that belonged to your family?" I asked. She blinked. "What? You ever stand somewhere your grandfather worked his whole life and hear somebody call it obsolete?" She didn't answer, because there wasn't an answer. Just silence, mixed with distant yelling after another goat climbed onto somebody's outdoor kitchen setup. By sunset, the county issued an emergency order forcing Cedar Run to reopen the original corridor immediately pending full legal review. Construction crews started tearing into the cul-de-sac less than 48 hours later. And let me tell you something. There was a certain kind of poetry watching bulldozers rip apart the exact same pavement they'd laid down, acting like my land didn't matter. Nobody from the subdivision waved at me after that. Can't say I blamed them. The road got restored exactly where it had always been. Gravel packed down. Gates rehung. Access returned. My livestock moved normally again, and little by little Cedar Run settled back into its carefully managed version of peace. But things never fully went back to normal. Some residents moved out within the year. HOA meetings turned ugly from what I heard. Property values dipped after videos of cattle wandering through the subdivision spread online. Folks around town picked sides too. Some people called me petty. Others said I defended what was mine the only way anybody would have listened. Truth is, maybe both are right. I still think about Vanessa sometimes. Last I heard, she left Cedar Run Development Group not long after the lawsuits started piling up. Part of me feels sorry for her. Another part remembers those dead goats during the heat wave and feels absolutely nothing at all. Funny thing is, if she'd just sat down with me in the beginning, really listened instead of trying to win, none of this would have happened. That's the part people miss. This was never about revenge. It was about people treating working land like it was empty space. Like generations of labor could be erased by branding meetings and architectural renderings. But land pushes back, sometimes quietly, sometimes with lawyers, and sometimes with 24 goats and a herd of cattle walking straight through a gated community at 6 in the morning. Even now, every once in a while, I'll drive past Cedar Run on feed runs and still catch faint hoof marks baked into the edge of the pavement where the asphalt cracked under the weight of my herd. The HOA tried covering them once. Didn't hold. Maybe that's fitting. Some reminders aren't supposed to disappear. And honestly, I still don't know whether what I did was justice or just stubborn pride finally running out of patience. So you tell me, if somebody paved over a piece of your family's life and called it progress, would you have handled it differently? Or would you have opened the gate too?